This is a Dynamite Network podcast.
Hi, welcome to the Dynamic Duel Podcast, a weekly show where we review superhero films and debate the superiority between Marvel and DC by comparing their characters in stat-based battle simulations. I'm Johnny DC.
And I'm his twin brother, Marvelous Joe.
And in this episode, we will be reviewing Part 3 of DC's Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths animated film. It is the conclusion of not only the trilogy of Crisis films, but also of the Tomorrowverse as a whole.
Good riddance is what I say.
You know, I wasn't with you early in the Tomorrowverse, but I'm there. I'm right there. Of course, we're going to be talking about the film later on in this episode. Actually, you know what? I lied. It's going to be right now because this is a short episode. It's sort of the calm before the storm that is Comic-Con. Joseph's going on vacation this week, so we're recording this episode really early, and we're pretty much going to just get right into it.
Yep. Yeah, we're going to skip over the no prize because we only got 2 answers by the time we started recording this episode. So we're going to give you guys another week for the question of the week, which is...
what has been your favorite Disney Plus original series from Marvel Studios so far? Thanks to everyone who's called in with an answer so far.
Everyone else, record your answer at dynamicduel.com by clicking on the red microphone button in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, which will prompt you to leave us a voicemail. Your message could be up to 30 seconds long, and don't forget to leave your name in case we include you on the podcast. We'll pick our favorite answer and award that person a Dynamic Duel No Prize that we'll post to Instagram. Be sure to answer before July 27th.
Real quick, guys, our artificially intelligent duel simulator, AJ9K, has a message for our listeners, so listen up.
Why, hello there. Do you want even more from this podcast? Then become a part of the Dynamic Duel community on Patreon, where you can choose from 3 tiers. The Dynamic 2.0 tier gives you access to our Discord chat server, the Fantastic 4 tier gives you 2 bonus episodes each month, and the X-Force tier makes you an executive producer of this show. Lastly, the Dynamite Podcast Network tier lets you create your own podcast using this Monte Carlo simulator. Johnny and Joe will help you develop your show, provide graphic support and consultation, and get you simulation results. Pitch the twins your ideas via email at dynamicduelpodcast@gmail.com. Check it out at patreon.com/dynamicduel. Pip pip cheerio.
Thanks, AJ9K, and thanks to everyone who supports the podcast.
Be sure to tune into the other shows in the Dynamite Podcast Network this week, including Max Destruction, which pits your favorite action heroes from film and television against each other. This week, hosts Ken and Scotty are pitting Deadpool against The Mask. On the Senjo World podcast, host Zachary Hepburn speculates on fights between fan-favorite anime and manga characters. The show is currently on a season hiatus, but it's coming back in a few weeks, so this is the perfect time to catch up on Senjo World's 40-episode library.
And on the Console Combat podcast, hosts John and Dean find out who would win in fights between popular video game characters. In yesterday's episode, they found out who would win in a battle between Bowser, Mario's villain, and King Dedede, Kirby's villain.
Visit dynamicpodcasts.com or click the link in our show notes to listen to all of the shows in the Dynamite Podcast Network. But with all of that out of the way, now let's move on to the main event of this episode, where we review Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 3. Alright, Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 3, as I mentioned earlier, is the conclusion to a trilogy of films that in themselves are the conclusion to a 10-part DC animated film series known as the Tomorrowverse, which began with Superman Man of Tomorrow in 2020. The Tomorrowverse in itself follows a 16-film animated universe from DC, officially known as the DC Animated Movie Universe, that began with 2013's Justice League The Flashpoint Paradox, and ended with 2020's Justice League Dark Apocalypse War.
You've already lost me.
No, I haven't. You know what I'm talking about. Though I will admit, maybe some people don't. And that's the problem.
Basically, DC has had two long-running animated movie universes. The initial major one was the DC animated movie universe, which was 16 films, and then the most recent one, which started in 2020, was the Tomorrowverse.
Sort of. It's actually recently been revealed that the Tomorrowverse is in fact considered to be a part of the DC animated movie universe, just its second phase, or the second story arc, as it were. And I'm not gonna lie, I hate that. I thought Justice League Dark Apocalypse War was a perfect conclusion. We rated it 5 stars in our review. And while Crisis Part 3 doesn't diminish Apocalypse War, as I was afraid it was going to while watching it, it does make it all the more obvious that the Crisis trilogy is nowhere close to being as good of a film. In fact, I'd say each film in the Crisis trilogy got subsequently worse, which is unfortunate because I wanted the Tomorrowverse to be good. And with its conclusion dropping the ball, I feel like the Tomorrowverse in its entirety is kind of pointless and better off forgotten.
Well, it's strange because it introduced the concept of the multiverse to DC animation, right? And at the conclusion of this film, that's all gone now. So you largely have an exercise in redundancy, I guess. I'm afraid that this is what's going to happen to the Marvel Multiverse saga, is that when all is said and done, after the events of Avengers Secret War and everything is perhaps collapsed into one universe again, a lot of people are going to feel like these whole series of Marvel phases were pointless.
Yeah, you should be afraid. You should be very afraid. Because clearly that's possible. Now, I've recommended some Tomorrowverse films in the past, and if you've gotten to this point in the universe based on my recommendations, I just want to apologize. I'm not going to recommend this film, but just in case you plan on watching it for yourself and want to avoid spoilers, I'd probably stop listening to this episode now, then come back later and finish it once you've seen the movie. You may have been spoiled on something already. Just go with it. It's fine. Now, I was excited for this film initially. I thought Crisis Part 1 was really interesting, and Part 2 was a decent enough setup for what I had hoped would be a conclusion as epic as Justice League Dark Apocalypse War. But what I got instead was actually almost an hour and a half of people just talking. Like, there was little to no action, and not against any kind of threat that you actually cared about.
That's true. I don't think a single punch was thrown in this movie. You know, there were a lot of like beams being fired and stuff like that, but it was primarily against the Anti-Monitor. They did fight some dinosaurs, which I thought was kind of weird. But yeah, little to no action, which I think is the major downfall. Like, the movie could have been serviceable. Yes, there was a lot of exposition, a lot of talking and stuff like that, but I think its biggest crime was that it wasn't entertaining from a superhero action standpoint, which is, you know, what people watch these movies for. It's why the genre exists.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I don't necessarily always need to be entertained as long as the story is good and, you know, is captivating. But that was not the case here. It definitely suffers from a villain problem, you could say. You know, in the first film, there was a Mazo and the Crime Syndicate. In the second, there were Shadow Demons and Psycho Pirate. In the third, there was the Anti-Monitor, though I'm hesitant to even call him that because none of the characters ever did in the film, and he bears little to no resemblance to the Anti-Monitor from the comics. This is more of like a Shadow Demon Megazord of sorts, but without any of the character or motivation that was teased in conversations with Psycho Pirate in Part 2.
Right, yeah, they hinted at some characterization of the Anti-Monitor, like you said, toward the end of Part 2, but here he was more like a force of nature, the Anti-Monitor, and there were like dozens of him, or like millions, I guess.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I wanted that motivation, that hint of it that I saw in Part 2, but that never materialized into anything, and I think that was a huge, huge downfall for this film. Now, I've said in the past that if you're going to adapt the Crisis on Infinite Earths comic storyline to a film, you first need to establish a cinematic multiverse beforehand. For anyone not familiar with the comic storyline from the 80s, it was a way for DC Comics to consolidate the continuity from their Golden and Silver Age comic stories, which had been established as existing within separate but parallel universes, a multiverse, which was revealed to contain a near infinite number of Earths. On Earth 1, you had the Justice League. On Earth 2, you had the Justice Society. On Earth 3, the heroes were villains and the villains were heroes. Earth 5 was home to the Charlton Comics characters that DC had acquired. Earth S was home to the Fawcett Comics characters. Earth X was home to the Quality Comics characters, so on and so forth. By the Tomorrowverse's second film, Justice Society World War II, the multiverse was established, and it was something most subsequent films continued to build upon in anticipation for this concluding trilogy. Now, a lot of people have not loved the Tomorrowverse. From the beginning, I praised the character designs, but story-wise, other than a fantastic adaptation of Batman The Long Halloween and a decent Green Lantern film, the Tomorrowverse wasn't really good enough to build any kind of anticipation, and the approach to adapting the Crisis storyline across 3 films was inconsistent at best and super confusing at worst, because the first 2 films kind of play loose with time and don't follow a linear narrative structure. This one does. I wasn't anticipating that, and it was kind of disappointing. Now, unfortunately, I wouldn't be surprised if most audiences found the film super confusing and inaccessible, because it requires you to have knowledge of animated projects outside of the existing Tomorrowverse films. Not only do they reference Justice League Dark Apocalypse War, but they have homages to Super Friends, Teen Titans, and the Timverse, which includes Justice League the Animated Series and Batman the Animated Series. The thing is, though, even if you're a fan of those shows, the brief cameos they offer really weren't enough to get excited about, except for maybe the final performance of Kevin Conroy as Batman and Mark Hamill's Joker in that homage. But otherwise, yeah, I was not impressed.
I agree. I do want to take a moment to highlight Kevin Conroy's final performance, though. If you're going to go out with a bang, that is how you do it. The scene between his Batman and Mark Hamill's Joker, it was less than a minute long, but the dialogue between the two of Batman realizing that his universe was coming to an end and to decide to go out fighting the Joker was perfection. And I'm so glad that Kevin Conroy got that opportunity as his final performance, because it was very touching and probably, honestly, the best part of this film.
Hands down, it was the best part of this film. It was so meta and yet so epic and even cathartic in a way.
Yeah.
If you find the clip online, that's all you need to watch from this film, essentially, is what I'm saying. It's a great clip. You guys should watch it if you decide not to watch the film. But even then, the Batman the Animated Series homage, along with the other homages and so many things in this trilogy, felt shoehorned.
For sure. You know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of DC's attempt to explore the multiverse in the Flash movie, the live-action Flash movie that came out with Ezra Miller, how we saw all these different worlds with, Adam West's Batman and George Reeves' Superman and Christopher Reeve's Superman. It was a nice little wink and nod for fans of the DC Comics and DC media, but it's hollow because there's no real substance there. Like, just showing them and not having them be really a part of the story is kind of a waste, and it's not substantial enough.
It's cheap. It's a cheap way to get you excited. And I'll be honest, I loved that scene in The Flash. The more I look back on it, the more I don't like it as much. I think it was probably just the experience of seeing it in the theater that really made me enjoy that. And I definitely did not get that same kind of feeling watching this version of it, because this was, like you said, essentially the animated version of that.
Mm-hmm.
It was just thrown in there, as were a ton of characters. Like, they introduced us to a modern Black Canary just so she and Green Arrow can essentially wink at each other, and that's basically it. They introduced us to the Losers, which, okay, kind of unnecessary and obscure. They teased Darkseid, but we didn't get to see a new version of him either.
The Losers thing actually surprised me because I realized that there was no DC showcase short that came out in the time of the Tomorrowverse that did not in some way tie into this Crisis series of films. Every short had a purpose, whether it was Commandy or The Losers or Constantine House of Mystery.
Right.
It was all kind of required viewing for full enjoyment of these Crisis films.
Exactly, yeah.
And if you think it's hard to get people to watch Marvel Disney Plus television shows that tie into films, look at how the Marvels movie performed because it required so much Disney Plus viewing, such as WandaVision and Miss Marvel and Secret Invasion to enjoy that. Try getting people to watch, the DC Showcase shorts. I don't think anybody really watches those. Of course, we review them on this podcast, but they're some of our least listened to episodes,
Yes, by far.
So kudos to the people who actually watch the DC Showcase shorts and are big enough fans to basically consume all the media that DC is throwing at them. I think you guys are the ones that are going to get the most out of this movie, and everyone else is just going to be left so cold.
But even if they did watch the Losers short, it's not like there's any kind of payoff here. They mentioned that they're just a bunch of losers, and that's it. Like, it's kind of cool to see Aquaman fight a dinosaur, but it's a very fleeting moment in a film that feels very long. Both of my daughters and my wife fell asleep during this movie, and I wanted to.
I think the third act was the best part, though.
Really? I was not happy with the third act. I actually liked the first act the most.
The first act was a bunch of randomness because they were in the Bleed universe where the laws of physics did not apply. So it was just, it was very chaotic and strange. Whereas the third act wrapped everything up, kind of, and answered a lot of questions.
Yeah, I guess, but it wrapped everything up in an underwhelming way. Like, everything about this film to me was so underwhelming and unsatisfying. The only redeeming quality I really have to comment on, besides the Kevin Conroy cameo, is the film's ambition. Like, creating a 10-film universe for the sole purpose of adapting the Crisis on Infinite Earths storyline is no easy task, because it requires the filmmakers to capture the same sense of shock and awe that readers initially had when decades of storytelling culminated in this epic story with unbelievable stakes. It was the Infinity War and Endgame of its time. And while most of the films in the Tomorrowverse probably worked really well on paper, as we've mentioned in our past reviews, when you see the final product, all you could do is hope that they get it right the next go round. Except this time, there won't be. And I guess all I'm left with is the hope that James Gunn can do better when DC's next animated universe begins with Creature Commandos next year.
That is definitely a good thing that you can say about this film, is that at the end of the day, it gives you hope, again, that something better will come along next time. That said, I have faith that James Gunn will be able to put out a better product.
Yeah, same. And honestly, like, James Gunn was going to do that whether this film provided closure to an existing animated universe or not. So There's not much solace in the fact that this sets up something new, because it was going to happen anyway. Now, usually in our reviews, we have a character breakdown. And I'll be honest, there's really no character arcs in this film to break down. Like, sure, there are character moments that are cathartic in some way, but those characters also only have like 2 lines in the entire movie.
I think the character with the most development was probably Constantine.
Yeah, you could say that. His story really revolves around his past actions that resulted in the creation of the multiverse, him and the Flash. But a lot of it is just really exposition. I'm not sure if he learns anything. He does get to move on to the afterlife at the very end, which is nice. But other than that, not much more to say.
Well, he tried to sacrifice himself, which felt very un-Constantine-like. But the dream machine, or whatever that was...
The miracle machine.
The miracle machine. Honestly, I don't remember what that's from. That was the one thing that had me scratching my head.
Oh, that was from the Legion of Superheroes. You remember when Supergirl had to make a wish at the very end and like reality kind of split? It was a weird scene.
Is that the thing that Brainiac was using to try to take over the universe?
Yes.
Okay, all right, yeah, I remember what it is now. But it was strange because, like, for some reason, the dream machine was outside of time and space, and yet the bleed dimension was also outside of time and space. And I don't know, there were a lot of like disparate elements that seemed a little convenient in terms of being able to withstand the destruction of the primary universe.
Right, and you're referring to the end of the film. The thing is, though, at that point, they're outside of the bleed. They are on the Monitor's spaceship, which exists between dimensions, but they're also on Warworld, which also exists between dimensions. But they say that the Miracle Machine exists between dimensions. So it's like, what? How many in-between dimensions are there?
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of different places to go to escape the Anti-Monitor, is all I'm saying. Especially when you don't have someone like Lex Luthor ratting you out, you know?
Right. I guess the only other character worth mentioning was Supergirl. Of course, her arc kind of continues from the past film, but for a majority of this film, she basically just feels guilty for killing the Monitor, and at the end decides to sacrifice herself because she feels responsible for the predicament that all of the Earths find themselves in. So it was inevitable. She died in the comic storyline as well. Totally saw it coming. The one character that should have had more backstory, I feel like, was Batman. Because in the last film, he was a dick to everyone, didn't learn his lesson, and then for some reason at the end of this film, he's like, oh, I'm going to lose you all, kind of, in a way. And it's like, okay, buddy. All right.
Yeah, we never really saw that growth.
Not at all. Which is a shame, because Jensen Ackles was a good Batman. Actually, a lot of the cast was good here. I just want to make that shout out. Jensen Ackles as Batman, Megan Donnelly as Supergirl, Darren Criss as Superman, and Stana Katic as Wonder Woman. I will miss this voice cast for sure.
And Matt Ryan came back, who has always, in my mind, been the perfect voice for Constantine. And this is like for sure the last time we're probably going to hear him as the character. So that's a little bittersweet.
Yeah, I do wish his dialogue was better. I wish the character was written better. Definitely not as good as Apocalypse War, but that would be a challenge in and of itself.
Few things are as good as Apocalypse War, right?
Right, fair.
In a world where fantasies collide and heroes clash, one podcast network rises above the rest. Prepare yourself for the ultimate showdowns in comic books, video games, movies, and anime. The Dynamite Podcast Network presents Console Combat, where video game legends brawl every Monday. Dynamic Duel, where comic book titans smash every Tuesday. Max Destruction, where TV and action heroes battle every Wednesday. And Sendro World, where anime champions clash every Thursday. Join us as we speculate on the matches and, armed with the power of mathematical simulations, discover who will emerge victorious. Visit dynamicpodcast.com, where we settle the debate and settle the score.
Let's move on to the story highlights. The film begins with the heroes of the multiverse attacking the Anti-Monitor, successfully damaging him with light-based attacks, though he adapts and generates armor to protect himself. Before the Anti-Monitor can fully charge up and project an antimatter wave, the Monitor, having just been fatally burned by Supergirl's heat vision, with his dying breath sends the surviving Earths to the interdimensional bleed outside of the multiverse, where the Anti-Monitor can't find them.
I wonder why he didn't do that to begin with. Why did he wait until the moment of his death to send everyone to the bleed, where they were more safe?
Oh, because he sucks. That's the only reason. I don't know.
All right. It seemed like a last-ditch effort, but it was also the best way to protect so many Earths that had been destroyed by this point.
I think maybe he didn't want to do it because it was a last-ditch effort, knowing the chaos that would befall the different Earths if he did.
Oh, you mean due to the lack of laws of physics?
Right, quantum physics specifically.
I guess Lex Luthor did mention in the movie that all the Earths were going to eventually die due to these catastrophic events, so maybe that's the answer to why the Monitor didn't do this in the first place.
Right, exactly. Like I said, it was a last-ditch effort. Now, flashing forward 8 months, Superman of Earth 1 and Hawkgirl find Wonder Woman adrift in the bleed and bring her aboard their ship, explaining that they found her tiara floating in the interdimensional space and suspected her immortality allowed her to survive the Anti-Monitor's antimatter wave from the previous film. After reuniting with Earth 2 Superman, Wonder Woman is taken to the Monitor ship, where she learns that because the bleed exists outside of space-time, both space and time are in flux across the surviving worlds, making it a challenge to protect and provide for the survivors. Wonder Woman, the Superman, and others then rescue the inhabitants of Earth 1 from dinosaurs that emerged from a chronal anomaly along with the losers.
Now, does this movie imply that there was only one Wonder Woman in the multiverse?
It kind of seemed that way.
Right, because then you would have a whole multitude of Wonder Women surviving the destruction of their universe due to the antimatter wave.
Which, to me, is dumb. Because
it's bullshit.
Wonder Woman has never been immortal. I mean, immortal, yes, in the sense that she doesn't age or like ages very slowly and may not die from aging. But the fact that she could survive antimatter when so many other things in the universe couldn't makes me wonder why she gets to be so special.
Yeah, none of the other Themyscirans or even like the Olympian gods or anything else that was around in that universe were able to outlive its destruction. But she was.
So dumb. I hated that.
They used that at the end, though, implying that, like, because she was immortal, she had, like, almost infinite life to sacrifice, I guess, was the idea. That's how I understood it.
Also hated that. If you make Wonder Woman immortal, why even give her bracelets? You know?
That's true.
I don't get it. Now, a secret society of supervillains led by Lex Luthor convenes on Earth 10, where they discuss how the multiverse Earths can't survive the bleed. It's revealed that Psycho Pirate is Lex's prisoner, and Lex forces Psycho Pirate to reach out to the Anti-Monitor. Meanwhile, on the same Earth, Batman and his allies battle an army of time-displaced Nazi soldiers armed with weapons from Gotham's villains. When Batman is gassed with fear toxin, he remembers encountering an elderly Barry Allen during his time on Warworld. Now, of course, Earth 10 in the comics is actually Earth X. It's like the Roman numeral 10, where Nazis never lost the war. It's the Earth where the Quality Comics characters like Uncle Sam and Black Condor live. One thing I really didn't get in this film is how Psycho Pirate became so freaking weak. Like, how would he become Lex Luthor's prisoner when he could totally just take control of Lex Luthor and all of the other villains?
Well, he was being tortured at the start of this movie, so you have to assume that somehow he was captured and tortured immediately, I guess.
Okay, maybe, but also, he's the freaking Psycho Pirate. Like, he was totally amped up with power in the second film and could have easily just projected his emotions to take control of the situation, whether he's being tortured or not. Like, if he's feeling pain and, like, distress from being tortured, he could project that distress onto the people torturing him.
That's valid.
So that was dumb. Moving on, back on the mothership, as Supergirl expresses remorse for killing the Monitor, Lex Luthor arrives just as the Anti-Monitor finds and destroys Aquaman's underwater world of Earth 146 by projecting an antimatter wave. After Batman confides with Dr. Midnight about his vision of the Flash, Dr. Fate confirms that Batman's vision was real, and that to solve their ongoing crisis, they would need to look back to before the creation of the multiverse. When Jon Stewart remembers that John Constantine mentioned that he'd been around since before the universe began, they manage to find him drunk in a saloon on Earth 18 and suffering from memory loss.
The scene in which Supergirl is confessing her guilt to Batgirl, I assume is around the time that Supergirl revealed the existence of the Dream Machine to Barbara Gordon, and I'm wondering why she didn't ever think to use the Dream Machine to stop the Anti-Monitor to begin with.
That's a great question, and that's a major plot hole. She knew the location, so she could have easily told everyone where to find it and how they could use it. It's really weird that she didn't do that. But, you know, regardless, at the very minimum, they should have had the scene where she told Batgirl about it.
Yeah.
Maybe they didn't have that because then they realized that if that had been the case, she could have used the Miracle Machine to save everyone from the very start.
Plot hole.
Now, after the Anti-Monitor finds and destroys Earth 2, the heroes on Monitor's ship deduce that the Anti-Monitor is able to find their worlds in the bleed because someone there is in contact with him. While Lex Luthor confesses to sacrificing worlds to gain more information on the Anti-Monitor, back on Earth 18, Batman, Dr. Fate, and Constantine perform a seance to access Constantine's past memories, where they view the concluding events of the film Justice League Dark Apocalypse War and learn that Constantine encouraged the Flash to go back in time to kill Darkseid as a baby so that he can never destroy their universe. Unknown to the Flash, Constantine sacrificed a part of his soul to place a spell on Flash so that any being he encountered would die, knowing that the Flash wouldn't be able to bring himself to actually kill a baby. As one of the immutable pillars of existence, Darkseid's death shattered reality, creating a multiverse of infinite Earths.
First of all, how cute was baby Darkseid?
I just wanted to grab him and squeeze him and just be like, "Oh, little baby Darkseid."
I don't think I could have come to kill him either. He was just too adorable. Second of all, how do you feel about Darkseid being like a pillar of the universe, what the MCU would call, an absolute point or a nexus being or something like that?
I think it makes total sense. I actually really like that explanation. They also refer to him as like a fixed point in time. So yeah, it reminded me a lot of like a nexus being for a Marvel.
Does that mean, though, that the DC universe is always destined to be destroyed by Darkseid obtaining the anti-life equation?
I think so. I think that's what the final crisis was all about in the comics, because that's what happens. Darkseid is essentially DC's devil, and there's only one of him in the entire multiverse in the comics when the multiverse was reestablished. So yeah, I actually really liked that.
My understanding of the situation is that because Constantine and the Flash created a universe in which there was no Darkseid, the universe kind of shattered and started cascading in a series of events and choices that would split off alternate dimensions and whatnot.
Yeah, an infinite number of dimensions. It was unsustainable, essentially, is how they explained it. Now, when the heroes witness Anti-Monitor destroy Earth AD, which is Commandy's Earth, Lex deduces that the energy of the merged suns should be powerful enough to destroy the Anti-Monitor, though Superman would likely die absorbing and delivering the energy. Guilt-stricken, Kara takes Superman's place, flying into the sun to absorb its energy. When the Anti-Monitor appears in the bleed once again, the heroes of the multiverse attack it in an effort to buy Kara time to absorb enough energy. When Martian Manhunter takes over Lex Luthor's mind, using him to encourage Superman to disable the Earth's towers and pull the planets out of the bleed, the heroes comply, allowing Martian Manhunter to emerge with Warworld and deliver a blow to Anti-Monitor strong enough to crack his armor. Meanwhile, on Earth 18, new members from the Green Lantern Corps find John Stewart and deliver him a Green Lantern ring.
And now we finally know why the Warworld movie even existed, because I think we speculated in previous reviews that the Warworld movie had no purpose in the larger Tomorrowverse narrative, and we were wrong. This was its purpose, to be used as a weapon against the Anti-Monitor.
Right, exactly. Part of me still doesn't care. Part of me doesn't think that needed to be a film, but I mean, it is honestly cool to see Warworld in action. Now, when Anti-Monitor attacks Warworld, John Stewart and his core members manage to shield it from the Anti-Monitor wave. To fuel Warworld with enough emotional energy to attack Anti-Monitor again, Martian Manhunter takes control of the mind of Electrocutioner on Earth 10 to persuade Psychopirate to use his power to unify the emotions of every Earth in the multiverse. With Warworld able to breach the Anti-Monitor's armor once again, a solar-energized Supergirl flies into Anti-Monitor and sacrifices herself to destroy him. Superman brings her body to Warworld, where the heroes and villains of the multiverse have grouped. Now, one thing that I thought was bullshit was the fact that the Green Lanterns were able to stop an Anti-Monitor wave, because everything that the heroes have been throwing at it prior to this proved ineffective. So why now all of a sudden?
Yeah, the Green Lanterns were like, this isn't going to work. And John Stewart was like, you just have to have the willpower or something like that. I'm like, that's such crap, because then you could just have the Green Lanterns going and protecting every Earth. They could have been doing that this whole time. The movie does make you think that Psycho-Pirate would find newfound motivation in trying to take over Warworld, because the Psycho-Pirate controlled Warworld would be almost unstoppable, you would think.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that'd be wild. I am really curious as to what emotion he had everyone in the multiverse feel, all of the different Earths, because they never say.
They all got super horny.
That's it. That's probably it. I can see that.
Stupid.
When Batman and Dr. Fate explain the reason for the multiverse's broken and expanding nature, it's deduced that the Anti-Monitor was the multiverse's natural defense to stop its limitless and chaotic expansion. As hundreds more Anti-Monitors suddenly emerge, Batgirl reveals that Supergirl once told her of a miracle machine that existed in a pocket dimension between realities. Using Nightshade's teleportation powers, the heroes are able to transfer the miracle machine to Warworld. As Earths 508 and 12 fall to the Anti-Monitors, the heroes come to the conclusion that to save the multiverse, they need to merge it into one prime universe with its own history.
How did Martian Manhunter know where to find the Dream Machine?
So my guess is that since Warworld exists between universes, he was able to expertly navigate them because that's what he had been doing this whole time. He wasn't in the bleed with everyone else. He had always been on Warworld, just in between everything. How he was able to get Nightshade to teleport the Miracle Machine onto Warworld, even though she was like, I can't do it, was weird because he was just like, oh, yeah, you can. And it was just there.
Good explanation.
Exactly.
I wonder why, if Martian Manhunter had control of Warworld this entire time, if he didn't kind of corral the surviving heroes and use it as a base, since apparently it was able to navigate the multiverse in that way. It became a base at the end, but I feel like that could have happened sooner.
Yeah, he really should have been around in the first 2 movies. But they did that whole trick with like, oh, he was there when Warworld exploded. Wait, no, he wasn't. It was cheap. In the final moments of the film, Wonder Woman sacrifices her immortal self to power the Miracle Machine to create a new universe, which a majority of the heroes and villains step into, saying goodbye to one another before merging into the new universe. As the rest of the multiverse and Warworld are destroyed, the Spectre and Constantine move into the afterlife. In the new single Prime universe, a young Wonder Woman plays on the island paradise of Themyscira. Which makes me wonder how she got there, because she wasn't one of the few that walked into the new universe.
I assume the new universe is populated by people, whether they sacrifice themselves or not. I mean, people who did sacrifice themselves were just a part of a larger whole, I guess, as it were. But the line regarding Wonder Woman's immortality not being a thing anymore kind of threw me off, because I guess they're saying she's not immortal now?
Yeah, her mother, Queen Hippolyta, implied that. She was like, princesses aren't immortal. I was like, what? Oh, now she's not? Okay.
I didn't quite look hard enough to determine if the art style of the new DC Prime animated universe was very different from the Tomorrowverse. Like, was that final scene done in the same style that the upcoming Creature Commandos is going to be in? And if so, is this our first look at James Gunn's new DCU?
It's hard to tell because the character designs in the Tomorrowverse weren't like that same kind of blocky Timverse style. They were all pretty unique. I can't tell if this is a new style of animation or if it's more of the same. It looks like it's more of the same to me personally, but who's to say that that's not the style that we'll be seeing with Creature Commandos? It could be.
I guess we'll find out later this year.
If this, in fact, is that same style, I wonder if this implies that this is our first look at Wonder Woman in James Gunn's DCU.
And maybe our first look at Themyscira that's going to be in the Paradise Lost HBO series.
And maybe our first look at the Wonder Woman costume that she'll be wearing with, like, the pants, which I would hate. A lot of speculation, a lot of unanswered questions, which I don't love. Like, at the end of a cinematic universe, as it were, I would love for everything to be wrapped up in a nice bow. That's not the case here. And I can't express how disappointed I am by the whole Tomorrowverse project. Now, with this film specifically, though it's ambitious and heartfelt, it's convoluted, and it's a dull conclusion to the Tomorrowverse that proves inaccessible to all but DC's most diehard animation fans. I really hope you guys are out there, and I really hope you were able to get some enjoyment out of this if you were, because no one else did. And I say that as a diehard animation fan from DC. Now, we gave Crisis Part 1 3.5 stars. We gave Crisis Part 2 3 stars. I think this film, Part 3, is one step below that. So I'm giving it 2.5 stars, a rotten rating on Rotten Tomatoes. I don't recommend it. And overall, I can't really say I recommend the Tomorrowverse as a whole, unfortunately.
I would recommend, if you're interested in getting into DC animation, to either rewatch or watch for the first time the DC animated movie universe, which began with Justice League, The Flashpoint Paradox, and ended with Apocalypse War.
And just end there. Like, don't continue on after that. It's not worth it. Except for maybe Batman and the Long Halloween. That was good.
Yeah, but if anything, the brief glimpse that we got in this film of Justice League Dark Apocalypse War, like seeing those characters and that art style and all that, just maybe remember how much we connected with those characters emotionally. So much more than we did with these hollow shells that were in the Tomorrowverse. And it also reminded me of just how great Apocalypse War was. And it definitely makes me want to rewatch it again.
It makes me want to watch all of the films in the DC animated movie universe, because actually there's a few that I haven't seen. And it was just a really well put together cinematic universe, one that rivaled, in my opinion, the MCU's Infinity Saga.
Absolutely. But you're not going to get a chance to rewatch the DC AMU films because you have a whole lot of other animated television shows to watch this summer, including My Adventures with Superman Season 2, Suicide Squad Isekai Season 1, Batman Caped Crusader Season 1, Kite Man Season 1, and Watchmen Chapter 1. So you have all of your free time accounted for, basically.
If you guys don't hear from me, it's because I'm watching TV. That is my life now.
I have to start watching Hit Monkey too, but I'm really looking forward to that.
I'm looking forward to all of it. Though I will say we will be dropping some of our reviews a little late, I think, just so that all of my life is not just television. I do have a job, I do have a family, so if things are coming late, just expect that.
Yeah, just know that they are coming. But I think that does it for this review. AG9K, help close us out.
Thanks for listening to Dynamic Duel. Visit the show's website at dynamicduel.com and follow us on Instagram at Dynamic Duel Podcast. You can support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/dynamicduel and joining a tier that works for you, or by rating and reviewing Dynamic Duel on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podchaser, or on our website. Don't forget to listen to the other shows in the Dynamite Podcast Network, including Max Destruction, Senjo World, and Console Combat.
Our next episode is going to be another review, but it's going to be an awesome review because it's going to be of Deadpool and Wolverine, another culmination of a trilogy that is infinitely more awesome than Crisis on Infinite Earths. I'm expecting a lot from Deadpool and Wolverine, and I hope it meets my expectations. I have to try to manage them because I am just off the walls with anticipation.
This is the only MCU film that you're getting this year, right?
Correct. There's still a couple more Sony Marvel movies coming out this year, including Venom and Kraven the Hunter, but Deadpool and Wolverine is the only MCU film, yeah. We're not getting another Marvel Studios film until Valentine's Day with Captain America Brave New World.
I was going to say sucks to suck, but I only have Joker 2 coming out this year. But that's going to be phenomenal, like way better than Deadpool and Wolverine.
Manage your expectations. We all know Joker Part 2 is going to suck, okay? It's a musical, all right?
I don't know that. You can't say that. I don't know that.
But that does it for this episode, guys. We want to give a big thanks to our executive producers, Ken Johnson,
John Starosky,
Zachary Hepburn,
Dustyn Balcom,
Miggy Matanguihan,
Brendan Estergard,
Nathaniel Wagner,
Levi Yeaton,
Austin Wesolowski,
AJ Dunkerley,
Scott Camacho,
Gil Camacho,
Adam Speas,
Andrew Schunk,
Dean Maleski,
Devin Davis,
and Joseph Kersting for helping make this podcast possible. And we'll talk to you guys next week.
Up and away!
True believers.
My middle name is Miracle Machine.